Happy Halloween, everyone. This is the Central Cast, and welcome to the finale of the reading of the short, scary stories for the Halloween special. It's been some good time. I've really enjoyed this. I'm gonna try to kind of make this intro quick because I have a long story. As I said I was gonna read off one of the best short, scary stories that I've actually read ever. Like, the last time I read this was months ago. The last time I opened this document was back in January, early January. Um, and and I was thinking about doing it for like a night with like just reading it off, but I never did. Or I started to, I think. I believe, yeah, I started to, but it was just taking like so long and stuff, or at least I thought it was at the time. That was before I started doing like stuff like this, where like they can get up to like an hour. Like Central Chat would get up to an hour, and Rambling with Blake would get up to hour, and stuff like that. So it's gonna be lengthy. As I've kind of explained what's gonna happen for tomorrow. There's gonna be the return of a new series, or the return of a new series. That's logical. The return of an old series from the channel. I said put prediction. You could put predictions like what you think I'm going to return in the comments of that video, but you can go ahead and do it in this one too, if you want to. But without further ado, I think we're gonna get right into this because we got a long story ahead. Just to give some perspective, this was originally supposed to be a PDF, but which was transferred onto a document. And just to give you a perspective, like of like how big this is. The font is like, it's kind of weird. It's got like it's from a website, so it's got like a weird font on here. It's Arial semicolon Helvetica colon sans serif. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I don't even know these fonts, but it's 9.7 for the font size, and it's 11 pages. So, it's nice and lengthy. Oh, I guess the 11th page is a link to the original, which I think I probably put there so that I could link it when I finish reading. But this is going to be wonderful. I love this story. I'm probably going to have to take brief pauses to like move the slider over because like for some reason, or not active presenter, I'm used to saying that Open Office for some reason has this thing where I like the first page is top right, the next page is like below that and to the left. Then the following page, the third page, will be on the right of the second page. I'm just gonna have to keep switching from left to right. But anyway, let's get right into this. This is The Blood Keeper by Christopher Maxim. Hello, readers. My name is unimportant. I am here to share a story of mine that I've kept bottled up for quite some time. I'm a believer in the uncanny and weird, as long as it is within the boundaries of reason. Even so, I can always explain the day's events to myself and understand them, no matter how odd. My mind craves logic and order, but the following events have none. I can't explain them away at the end of the day, and I'm not even sure of what actually happened. I'm left with a bunch of what-ifs. I can say with some certainty that it may have been a vivid hallucination or a very clever deception. Either way, I feel a need to disclose my tale if for no other. I read that as it. Either way, I feel a need to disclose my tale if for no other reason than to get it off my chest. The following occurred in the autumn of 2010. That's as specific as I will be. I live in a small but lively town in Massachusetts. The winters are cold and the summers are hot, but fall to me feels just right. being just shy of the proper drinking age and never having interest in such things. Anyhow, I found other activities to occupy my weekends, and weekdays for that matter. I've always had a passion for paranormal. It fascinates me, even to this day, with nothing better to do with my raging case of insomnia. I spent some of the nights investigating local cemeteries with my friends. You can call me a paranormal investigator of sorts, but I saw it as more of a hobby. Half the time my friends and I would goof off anyway. The only times that we actually became dramatically serious was when there was a lot of paranormal activity taking place. This didn't happen all that often, but when it did, we transformed from friends hanging out and having a good time to instant professional ghost hunters. I might have even pursued it as some sort of career choice had the following not taken place. I can tell you for certain that I won't investigate a cemetery again for as long as I live. It was a night like any other for myself. I was bored, I couldn't sleep, and I felt the need to do something outdoors. I called a few of my friends and asked if they wanted to investigate one of the local cemeteries that tended to have more activity than others. I was able to convince two of them to come with me. The others whom I called were angry that I'd woken them up. I didn't realize that it was already midnight. Anyways, the two friends that I did rope in met me at the cemetery. It took us each roughly half an hour to walk to there, even though we all lived on opposite sides of this town. The cemetery was smack dab in the center of town, making the location convenient for all of us, considering we were without transportation. After only an hour of investigating and goofing off, my friends left. There was little to no activity. The place was dead. No pun intended. Okay, maybe it was intended a little bit. I stayed behind. I figured that I would take a walk through the cemetery a few times in an attempt to become tired before heading home. I started walking about when I noticed something. Before I go into detail, I must describe to you the layout of the cemetery. It was quite large, overall. There were two sides, divided by a small street right off the main road. Each side had a stone wall that ran along the entire length of the graveyard. It came up to my waist, and only broke up where the two main gates were. Main entrances were, one for each side. On the other side was nothing but graves. The other side, the one that I was walking on, had graves, a stone tomb, and a small wooden shack. This shack was where the grave digger kept his shovels and other tools of that trade. What I noticed while walking towards it was a light illuminating the inside. I didn't even know that there was any electricity that ran to the shack. I guessed that the grave digger was working late tonight, it being around 2 a.m. at this point. I looked around, and I could make out a freshly made 6-foot deep hole near the shack, big enough for a coffin. This was nothing odd to me. This graveyard was a popular one, with at least 5 new headstones added each month. Every time the cemetery became full, some town workers would cut down some trees and extend it. The only thing that struck me as strange was the hour. I had only seen the gravedigger work during the day. After all, a huge gaping hole in the ground was a dangerous thing to come across in the middle of the night. This was enough to arouse my curiosity, so I decided to see what the old man was up to. I crept over quietly, making my way to the cracked window located on the side of the shack. This way I could hear what was going on the inside. I knew about the window because I was the one who cracked it a year previous on one of my investigations. My friend and I were throwing rocks up in the air, trying to repeat the results of an urban legend that was passed down around town. It was our town's equivalent to Bloody Mary. It was said that if you throw rocks straight in the air and stand completely still, you could hear the screams of a woman by the name of Amelia before the rocks hit the ground. Amelia was a resident in the town during the 1940s. She died when strolling down this very street during the newer side of the cemetery's construction. A gravestone fell on her head while being moved to its proper location by a small crane. The gravestone was of her late husband, whom she allegedly murdered just 3 weeks before her death. Instead of hearing a scream, I heard the shatter of a glass a few yards away. I had broken the window on the side of the shack. Looking back now, I don't know why okay, come on. I don't know why I believe in the urban legend anyhow. I think it was fabricated to fool kids into hurting themselves. In any case, I approached the window and peered in. The gravedigger was not there. However, void of life, the shack was not. Again, like, that thing is the most annoying thing, how I had to move the slider over. But anyway, continuing on. Inside the shack, to my surprise, were 9 men. 9 men sitting at a long wooden table wearing tattered blue shrouds. The light I had seen was not a light at all, but what looked like several oil lamps. The men were eating what appeared to be reddish stew. It looked gross. Each man cringed when eating it, except for the tall man sitting at the end of the table, and the 2 sitting on either side of him. I was deeply confused. What was this? Some sort of town meeting? I crouched down and listened as the tall man began to speak. "Hello, young newcomers. Are you ready to start your trials?" He spoke with a firm voice. It resonated throughout the shack and beckoned even myself to listen. "Yes," the 6 men sitting at the table shouted in unison. "Trials? What trials?" The tall man spoke again. "Good. Bloodlight Callus will explain the rules." I could only presume that the man to his right was Callus, as he explained everything. My memory was always served me well, so I was able to recollect everything he said, as unnerving as it was. It seemed that the men in the shack were part of a cult called the Bloodlights, though they never referred to it as a cult. That's just what I gathered from what I heard. The trials were more of a game consisting of 2 teams that would disperse to either side of the cemetery. The tall man was the leader of the Bloodlights. And this game was his way of initiating new members. The winners would be accepted as full-fledged Bloodlights. At this point, I couldn't really believe what I was hearing, but I kept listening. Whether it was out of curiosity or fear of the men hearing me if I attempted to leave, I was immobile. Callus continued explaining the rules. Each team consisted of 4 members, 3 blood runners and 1 blood baron. It seemed that the newcomers would be the runners, and the 2 men standing at the end of the table with the taller man would be the barons. There was one more participant to be discussed, the tall man, the one who was leading the trials. He was the blood keeper. He was not on either team, but was the most important part of the game. He kept and guarded what was referred to as the blood. I thought that maybe he was referring to the blood, or to the red amulet that hung around the tall man's neck, because with every mention of the word blood, he would firmly clasp the amulet between his fingers and close his eyes, almost as if partaking a silent prayer. The job of the runners was to retrieve the blood from the blood keeper. The barons acted as coaches that would strategize the runners. It actually sounded like a fun game that I would partake in myself. So far, everything seemed simple, until the blood keeper spoke again. "With every word there is blood. Or with every wound there is blood. With every drop of blood there is light. Without death there can be no light." I have no idea what any of that meant, but it was captivating in a morbid kind of way. The blood keeper stepped over to a tall cupboard at the back of the shack that I hadn't noticed before. He opened it. Inside was a young woman, bound and gagged, with eyes wide open, futilely attempting to escape. My heart sank. This was far beyond normal. This was far beyond your normal run-off-the-mill cult ritual. I needed to find help. But what if they heard me? I was frozen with fear, and I could not take my eyes away. The blood keeper spoke again. "Repeat after me. The light of the blood can only be seen in death." The recruits chanted, "The light of the blood can only be seen in death." Just then, the blood keeper took a large red dagger from out of his cloak and grabbed the woman. All I could think was that this couldn't really be happening, could it? He pierced the knife deep into her gut. The others repeated, the light of blood can only be seen in death." The bloodkeeper stabbed again. The light of the blood can only be seen in death. I could see the life leaving the woman's face as she tried to yell once more with such an ashen and broken expression. The bloodkeeper thrust the knife deeper into the woman's stomach. The light of blood can only be seen in death. Right before she lost consciousness, she turned and looked directly at me. She looked indescribably hurt, both physically and mentally, as tears began to soak her face. At that moment, I couldn't even explain to you how knotted my stomach was. I immediately threw up right next to the shack. Luckily, no one heard me. The bloodkeeper made one final blow into the already dead girl's neck. The others uttered one last time. The light of blood can only be seen in death. If I had anything left in my stomach to vomit, I would have done so again. What scared me the most was the conviction at which he stabbed her. I could see it in his face. It was almost as if there was reason behind each wound he dealt, or at least to him there was. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, and watched the killer get up and reach into the brown satchel that he was wearing over his shoulder. He pulled out 3 empty vials. He then continued to fill the vials with blood that dripped from his dagger. I now realized that the blood in the game was not his amulet, but indeed actual human blood. The bloodkeeper finished explaining the rules to the newcomers. There are 3 vials. This gives, at most, 3 of you the opportunity to be accepted as bloodlights. I noticed Callus laugh under his breath, as if being accepted was unheard of. If you see a runner from the opposite team, what do? The newcomers answered together. Kill. If you see his... If you see... Okay, hang on. If you see a civilian, what do? They answered once more. Kill. I dry heaved for a solid 20 seconds, trying to vomit. If I wasn't in danger before, I now was. I should never have come here. God, if you exist, please get me the hell away from here, I thought to myself. The bloodkeeper spoke one last time. If you must stop at nothing to attain one of these vials. All others will be sacrificed. Your thirst for blood must be as strong as your will to live. Just then, the 9 men walked towards the shack door to leave and begin the games. I ran as fast as I could for the wooden part of the cemetery and hid behind the largest tree I could find. I did not want to wind up like that girl in there. I thought to myself as I caught my breath, pull yourself together. You just need to find a good opportunity to escape without being noticed. It shouldn't take much. I gathered my nerves and peeked out from behind the tree. Standing right there, not 10 feet away, were 3 of the runners, Callus, facing me. I darted my head back behind the tree. Did they notice me? I peeked again and noticed that their eyes were shut, and they were standing eerily still. They must have to do this before the game starts, to let the bloodkeeper hide himself from the immediate view. I was lucky. Maybe this was my chance to make a run for it. I spoke. Well, I thought, too soon. I heard Callus shout, "Let the trials begin." My heart was racing faster than you could even imagine. My fate was in the hands of the game now. I could see Callus and the 3 blood runners in the reflection of a small puddle near my hiding tree. It had rained the previous night. They seemed to be strategizing. My heart was pounding out of my chest so much that I was actually afraid they might hear it. I stood there, behind the tree, becoming exponentially nervous, and with each and every beat, I listened to the nearly inaudible whispers as men conspired. Then, when I couldn't take another second of torture, silence cut through the brisk night air, much like the bloodkeeper's dagger through that poor woman's neck. It sent the coldest chill down my spine. Why couldn't I hear them? Did they leave? I was too frightened to glance around the corner to see. I looked at the puddle. I couldn't see the reflection. What do I do now? I was not going to run through the woods. Not only would the loud crunch of autumn leaves compromise my location, but I had seen too many horror movies to know that that it wouldn't be a good idea. I also couldn't run through the cemetery. What if the blood runner spotted me, or a baron? Even worse, what if the blood keeper saw me? I didn't want to think about it. I calmed down as much as I could, given my current situation, and mustered up enough courage to peer around the tree. They were gone, or at least nowhere to be seen. I looked around and weighed out my options. To the left of the cemetery, after seemingly endless rows of headstones, was more woods and a lot of briars. This was not a viable possibility. Straight ahead were more headstones and a shack. There was no way I could get going to hide in the Bloodlight's den with the dead girl, even if I could make it there. To the right was even more headstones, but not as many. I squinted as I looked the distance. Oh yeah, there was a tomb off to the right of the graves. It was maybe 100 yards away. I wouldn't be able to waltz over there without being noticed, but maybe, just maybe, I could jump from tree to tree until I made it there. The woods did wrap around the whole cemetery, right up to the back of the tomb. Should I risk it? Or should I stay behind this tree, cowering in fear until it's over? The latter option was looking pretty good, but I knew if I stayed here too long, one of them would find me. Mama was right. She always told me to stay away from the cemetery at night. Do you know what kind of people hang out there? She didn't know the half of it. I took a deep breath and braced myself. Without so much as a second thought, I dashed in the direction of the tomb and hid behind the closest tree I could find. I gathered my wits and looked around the graveyard. There was still no one to be seen. I sprinted to the next tree. I took another quick I'm going to try that again. I took another quick glimpse of my surroundings. The coast was still clear. Before I could prepare myself to run to the next tree, I felt myself being lifted off the ground. In that moment, my body went numb with utter panic. The next thing I knew, before I could even think what was happening, I was atop a tree branch, looking directly at a blood runner. I didn't scream, and I didn't try to get away. My blood ran cold, and I sat still in terror, accepting what was happening. I exhaled what I thought would be my last breath. But just as I did, the blood runner spoke. "What's your name?" I was too in shock to say a word. "Come on now, what's your name?" He spoke more firmly this time, and I noticed that he had an English accent. His voice also sounded deep and brash, like one might sound after many years of drinking hard liquor and smoking cigarettes. I still couldn't find it in me to answer him. "Look, I noticed you at the window over there eavesdropping. If I wanted you dead, I could have pointed you out then. I want you to help me." "Help you?" is all I could say. "Yes, I'm going to use you as my advantage. I take it you know what we're doing here. And you know the rules of the game." I nodded slowly, still in shock. "Good. With you, I may be able to turn the tables to get the upper hand." My mind was racing, but I listened intently at what he was saying. "See that tomb over there?" He pointed to the tomb I had been on my way to before I was lifted off of my feet into the tree. I nodded once more. "That's where the blood keeper is." My stomach turned to think, this guy may have just saved my life. "Here, take my cloak." He handed me his blue shroud. I didn't know what he wanted me to do with it. "Go ahead, put it on. Or do you want me to gut you where you sit?" I quickly threw on the cloak. "Go over to the tomb and open the door slowly. The blood keeper will surely swing at you." I gulped, but continued to listen. "Just as he's about to end your life with that dagger of his, I'll swoop in and end his." "Why? That's not part of the game. His eyes darted at me. Then he gave a menacing smile. I just realized that I hadn't constructed a full sentence for the first. I had constructed a full sentence for the first time in his presence. Right, you are. Maybe I don't want to be a bloodlight. Maybe I'm not here to play this ritualistic sport of theirs. Maybe what I'm truly after is vengeance. He looked over at the tomb, then looked around the cemetery, probably to make sure no one was listening. Maybe, years ago, the man in that tomb, the one you know as the Bloodkeeper, stole something from me. Something I would never get back. The woman in that shack over there was not the Bloodlight's first sacrifice. Not by far. The man in that tomb murdered my wife and took her blood for the sake of this game. It took me years to find him. It took me even longer to be accepted into their ranks, even as a low disciple. He stared off in the distance for a moment. I could see the pain in his eyes. But tonight is the night. The Bloodkeeper must die in his own games and spill blood like so many of his victims before him. Even though his actions were admirable, I still wanted no part in any of this. My life was still in danger. If you so much as take one step in the opposite direction and deviate from the plan, I will come over and kill you myself. Now, get going. It seems I had no choice in the matter. His motives were blinding him from any sort of moral logic. Just like in the shack when I stood by and watched the Bloodkeeper kill that poor girl. He of all people should have made an effort to stop him, but no. The only thing on his mind was revenge. And now, I was tangled in an even larger mess than I was before. I did as I was told. I used this same method that I did before, jumping from tree to tree. Only now I didn't even bother being stealthy. The blue shroud protected my identity, and I had a feeling I might die tonight anyhow. What a waste of life. I made it to the side of the tomb. I stood there, with my back to the cold aged stone. My heart began racing again. I was about to come face to face with the Bloodkeeper, a cold-hearted monster. I crept along the side of the tomb until I could finally see the front of him. I took a quick glance and noticed the tomb door was shut. I could see the blood runner I'd met waiting behind one of the trees near the tomb. I didn't hear him move even once, so it was hard for my mind to wrap itself around the idea of him getting from a tree branch we sat on just a few yards away from me. His covertness was impressive. He just might be able to pull this off. My newfound confidence was in the runner, and no way lessened my fear of the Bloodkeeper. I crouched over to the tomb door and stared at it. I guessed that it was now or never. I reached for the old rusted handle and slowly, so as not to tip off the Bloodkeeper that I was there. I also may have been stalling just a bit. After all, I was opening the door to what very well could be my death. Just as I was about to actually open the tomb, the door swung open and hit me straight in the head. I fell backwards onto the ground. I must have suffered a concussion, because everything seemed a little blurry, and I couldn't feel myself losing consciousness. I looked up before I passed out, and I could see the Bloodkeeper standing before me in the moonlight. I was staring at a blurry vision of death, here to kill me, and to take the blood out of my racing heart. I blinked, and saw another figure. In my fuzzy state, I couldn't make out who was who, but one of them was thrusting his dagger into the other, over and over again. The prey, in a scuffle, fell to his knees, and then landed face first into the cold cemetery soil. The victor kept stabbing him. With each swing of his dagger, he seemed to become more and more furious, because I could hear the piercing sound of metal through the flesh grow louder. I prayed that it was the Bloodkeeper being torn apart. Otherwise, I was done for. I closed my eyes once again and passed out. "Are you all right there?" I heard an old man's voice say as I gradually began to open my eyes. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes fully and looked at the voice speaking to me. It was the gravedigger. But how? What? How? Where did they go? Is all I could manage to say. He looked puzzled. Where did they go? I couldn't wrap my head around any of this. What was going on? I should be dead. The gravedigger stared at me for a second, then changed his expression from confusion to sympathy. "Come on, you'll catch a cold out here." He invited me into the shack. Before I walked in, I noticed something. The newly dug grave I had seen near the shack was gone. I didn't know what to believe at this point, but I walked into the shack anyhow. The gravedigger, whose name I now know as Pete, fed me and gave me a jacket to wear. In a frazzled state, I couldn't help but tell him everything I had seen. He didn't look surprised at all. I didn't even think to describe the men by their given titles, Blood Runner, Baron, etc. But Peter responded with, "Sounds like you had a run-in with the Blood Keeper." "That's him. How do you know about the Blood Keeper?" My jaw dropped. His spirit has been haunting this place for over 100 years now, I suppose. I just glared at Pete, waiting for an explanation. He could tell I was still fatigued and confused, so he took the time to elaborate. He must have talked non-stop for over an hour. I could tell I struck a nerve with his story. In a nutshell, the Bloodlights were a sadistic cult that formed in the late 1800s and started terrorizing the local community, bringing on a heavy lust for blood. With each Bloodlight initiated brought more deaths. They would only use various cemeteries in the area as a field for their sport, digging a 6-foot hole each time, throwing the casualties/sacrifices in before they covered it back up. Who would look for dead bodies in a graveyard anyway, right? They racked up the dead toll to over 50 victims before their games were brought to an end. Things, however, went horribly wrong for the Bloodlights during what turned out to be their final game. An Englishman infiltrated their ranks and killed the Blood Keeper that night, with the help of a young man. Did I help him kill the Blood Keeper? The young man was never identified. The local authorities were able to round up the rest of the Bloodlights soon after. The death of the Blood Keeper left them leaderless and unorganized. After Pete explained everything, I couldn't help but sit there in awe. Did I relive what that young man went through that night? Or even wilder, was I that young man? Did I time travel? My logical mind immediately rejected the theory. I believed in the paranormal, but time travel is too far-fetched for me. In fact, until now, I've tried to forget about that night. I can never wrap my head around it, and I still can't. Maybe by writing this, I can finally put this experience, much like the Blood Keeper, to rest. The only thing that kept haunting me after I left the shack that night were the fuzzy images left in my mind before I passed out. Though I couldn't fully differentiate who was who. I was almost certain that it was the Blood Keeper who was stabbing the man I was helping, but against my will. What if nothing supernatural happened here at all, and the gravedigger lied to me, so I wouldn't divulge my story to anyone else without sounding completely and utterly crazy? What if he was a Bloodlight too? I also could have sworn I saw a shovel on the ground where the 6-foot deep hole used to be. What if... No, it can't be. They certainly would have killed me rather than constructed an elaborate ruse to keep me quiet, right? I'm just paranoid. One thing is for sure, though. I will never venture to any cemetery at night, ever again. whether or not the Blood Keeper is dead or still out there, making his rounds. There will be a link to this in the description below. This is certainly one of my favorite of the short scary stories I've ever read. The first time I read this, I can't remember when it was. It was probably a year ago. Or, hang on. Hang on. I think... Hold on. The first time I read it, I actually found it, I think 1.5 years, 2 years. I think, yeah, maybe 1.5 to 2 years ago was when I first read it. But then I kind of thought of it like later on, which was last January, which I decided I had the idea to read it at the time, but I just never really I never really did it for like a full video. So I really enjoyed this story. I'm glad I decided to eventually come to it and read it. But anyway, that's gonna be it for this Halloween special. So thank you so much for listening. And that is all for this time. I hope you enjoy. If you did, be sure to like and comment, tell me any suggestions you have. Also, be sure to share and subscribe. Excuse me. Also, be sure to share and subscribe for daily uploads. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.